Come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up, come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up,
So hi everybody, my name is Dan O'Riordan. I've worked 6 years for Capgemini. I started out my journey at Capgemini working for the financial services, and a lot of the work I did was application modernization. Do you do a lift and a shift of an application towards the cloud, or has a business value where you look to refactor it into a set of microservices? And then I joined the insights and data, particularly the AI and data engineering part of Capgemini. So I have global responsibility on everything to do with platform. So when I was preparing this chat, right, I decided to take this picture, right? So I went a bit crazy on DALL-E, on OpenAI. And there were 2 points. So firstly, I do a lot of snowboarding. I've been snowboarding over 25 years. I've broken knees, broken ribs. And I've noticed over the last couple of years in the Alps that the quality of the snow is really deteriorating. And you can actually see it with your own eyes. The second reason why I chose this photograph was a couple of weeks ago, I was skiing and snowboarding with my son. And I wanted a cool photograph of myself on a snowboard, right? So I asked my son, I said, Jack, can you take a picture of me on the snowboard? And as he's taking the photograph, he lifts his head above the camera and he says, Dad, you know who you remind me of? And I said, no, who do I remind you of? And he said, you remind me of a big fat polar bear. And I'm still paying for this kid's education, so I might have to reconsider that. On a serious note, on the emissions, data is absolutely key. Okay. So I think more so in Europe, right? I've spoken to people around the regulations around emissions, and what is the umbrella term we use is environmental, social, and governance. Now, if we look at this environmental ESG, it covers things like water wastage, green energy, carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, right? So that's the umbrella term. I'm going to kind of concentrate more on how we use data for things like emissions. And in terms of regulations, right, we have something called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And that's defined emissions across 3 scopes. And when I define these 3 scopes, you'll see later in the presentation how important these 3 scopes are and the challenge facing organizations to actually extract ESG-relevant data across these scopes. So scope 1 is what we call direct emission scope. That's everything to do with your own organization, what I call your own house, within the 4 walls of your organization. So that you can build a strategy to get control of that sort of data. Scope 2 is more the direct services you use. For example, your electricity supplier, your cloud service provider. Even if, for example, you're using IT services from Capgemini, the ESG data from your system integrator is scope 2. Now, scope 3 gets even more complicated, right? So that looks at things like supply chain. You could be a manufacturer of a mobile phone. The supplier is bringing providing the batteries for your mobile phone. That's what we call upstream scope 3 emissions, and you will be responsible for reporting on that. And downstream could be things like what are your processes around end of life for those mobile phones. So that's kind of giving what the 3 scopes are, right? And we'll kind of delve into how data mesh and data products are actually key for an organization to organize their data strategy. So I can't emphasize this enough. The regulations are beginning to start, right? And we had a similar thing with financial services. So I worked in the financial services sector, and a lot of organizations, they knew GDPR was coming, PII was coming, but they kind of kicked it down the road, and they said, no, it'll be fine. And then when it got too late, the financial services, banks and insurance companies, the actual penalties and fines started to come in. And then they were in panic stations. They actually left it too late. And so that's key to remember that, because the regulation is coming. It's not in place yet, but it is coming. And one key thing is, you could imagine that of course, you're responsible for your emissions for your own organization. But you're also reporting and need to report on the partners that supply you direct services, but also if you're in something like supply chain, those close partners that make up your full supply chain. And you will be responsible for reporting on your own emissions, but also scopes 2 and scopes 3. So well-organized data is a key lever. The only game in town are data products, your local data products, because that's where you have the local experts who can determine if a piece of data within that data set is relevant for your ESG reporting or not. If you still have centralized massive data lakes, it becomes really, really difficult to shift through that data lake to find out particular data points that need to be extracted to do your reporting. So the only game in town are the principles of data mesh and data products. And thanks to Starburst, we have an easy way to build data products. They have taken all of the theory. For the last 18 months, I've been speaking to clients around data mesh, and it was only when I came across Starburst I could show them a physical example of what a data product looks like in terms of its searchability, its addressability, the quality aspects. So what we're proposing here to help with ESG is where there are relevant ESG data points, they need to be surfaced at the base level, at your foundation level, and then aggregators of data products help you to build up so that you can get a handle on this data. So the Capgemini Research Institute, they did a survey. It was called Data for Net Zero. They interviewed 900 organizations across all industries. And these 900 organizations, they had set net zero targets, plans to reduce their emissions. But what we noticed, right, in the survey is a lot of organizations are looking at this reporting and getting a handle on their emission data as being a chore. What they need to look at, they need to do kind of a shift and look at it and say, when we get a handle and we look at, let's say, our baseline emissions, getting an understanding of these emissions and then looking at our existing business processes, identifying where the carbon-intensive activities are in those processes, and then actually streamlining them, okay? Because what you want, right, is to start taking this emissions data, integrating it with your processes, and future-proofing yourself, predicting and prescribing business outcomes. Because the shift, even the consumer sentiment around choosing to shop or to prefer organizations that are really, really conscious and aware and really proactive on how they regulate their emissions is absolutely key. Here is another page from the report, and this was kind of a little bit surprising for me, right? So of the 900 organizations that have set their net zero targets, 85% say they do embed emissions data in their decision-making processing. But when we actually looked at it closer, they're looking at it really more for reporting, okay? But they're not looking at improving the processes for future-proofing their business, looking at what the business outcomes would be with decisions being made by using this data. So at Capgemini, we've built a portfolio of offerings around this because we take it really, really seriously. There's 3 entry points, really. So the first entry point is what we call data strategy for net zero. So that's really kind of more details on what I'm talking about here today. Do you have a data estate modernization strategy? Are you worried maybe about the recession, right? So maybe you want to put that on hold, but you still want to move forward by actually breaking your data estate and organizing it locally through data products. So what's the strategy around that? So we have offerings around that. And we're working very closely with Starburst to take their Pathfinder and add some of the methodologies that come from Capgemini Invent, things like Lighthouse, to really improve that data strategy for net zero piece. The second piece is we have something that we call the Sustainability Data Hub. What we're looking at is what are the data models, because we've hired lots of experts in this field that are looking at what the data models are, that we can help an organization to kind of identify where in the organization these data models fit. And the third piece is the same as you have, let's say, financial reporting. Every organization is very familiar with the rules of financial reporting. What's coming with the regulations will be your ESG reporting and on your performance. How well are you as an organization in planning and strategizing, reducing your carbon emissions? And that will require certain different, it will require a certain changes within your organization. So what does that look like? How can we help with more the business side of it when it comes to things like the insights and performance measurement? We've got the experts who have that domain experience in this area to help. So when I got interested in Starburst, right, I looked at Starburst, right, as being data virtualization. I didn't see what they had actually done. So they'd taken the open source Trino, but what they did was they really improved by putting that data product experience engine at the top. Now, there are two ways you can build a data product, okay? There is what I call the traditional way, right? You ingest data, you hire some data engineers, they write some Python or some Scala, it runs on a Spark engine, and it ends up in some cloud data warehouse or in some S3 bucket, okay? So at Capgemini, we built a set of accelerators that can help with the infrastructure as code to provision all of the native services that you would have, let's say, on a Microsoft, a Google, or an AWS. But building a data product like that, right, is more complicated. Now, there may be times you need to prepare data. You may need the sophistication of a programming language to prepare that data set, but it is still more complicated. So what we're doing together with Starburst is we're giving two options to build a data product. Option one, you can do the traditional way, do the ingesting, but it is more expensive, it is more time consuming. Number two, use the federated SQL engine from Starburst. And that SQL engine is not just a query engine, it can also help you doing data discovery and actually writing to your cloud data warehouse. For example, if you have a migration strategy where you want to migrate some parts of your data estate to something like a Snowflake, the federated query can help with that. But the most important part is if you build a data product using the traditional ETL approach, or you do it with federated query, you have the choice. But the end result is not just a data set within some data warehouse. What you have is a data product with all the characteristics of a data product, the fact you can search for it, the fact that it's discoverable, the fact you can integrate it with it, really easily wrapped, okay? So that journey, right, what we're working on together is the initial methodologies on how do you decide what the data product is you're going to build, right? So that data product canvas where you're asking the questions, because anytime you bring that product thinking, right, you can build a product, but if nobody uses it, then you've just wasted your time. So upfront, using things like data product canvas to actually define what you're going to build. Then doing kind of an ideation, so you decide, okay, let's try and do it, create it with a federated query. That's a lot simpler and a lot more efficient than doing it. And if the federated query works, then you have your data product. and then creating a pipeline, a data factory pipeline, to actually streamline, keep improving agile, lean methodologies. That's what we help with at Capgemini. So here's the scenario. So I talked about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So scope 1 I call my house. It's your organization. You're using Starburst. You're working with Capgemini. And we have helped with the methodologies to actually design what you want to build, and the methodologies around how you do it in a really, really efficient way. So that's it. You're conscious and aware of your own organization. So you have a strategy in place. But what about your direct service providers? Are they as organized as you? So these are the questions you need to ask. And even the partners that help you in things like supply chain, you may, in the future, because of the requirements on reporting, ESG reporting, you may need to choose partners that comply with the same rigor of your organization when it comes to being conscious about emissions and ESG reporting. So, it's important to take that into consideration. And then this led me to the question, right? So I understand data mesh and how locally built data products are the only way to go if you want to organize your data estate, because the problem has just got too big. But I then asked myself the question, how do you extend the data mesh across organizational boundaries? I mean, you can't install a version of Starburst Enterprise in another organization. It's just too complicated. And I apologize for this. Twinkle, twinkle, ESG ecosystems ain't easy. I mean, it's too corny for words. So where I think, and I've been looking at, is data marketplaces. Okay, so if we take an example here, so this is your organization, one part of your organization, and we've defined, let's say, 4 domains: the purchasing, marketing, sales, and finance. And at the very, very bottom, you have got, let's say, maybe your operational data products. And you have mandated that all of the data product teams look to see, is there appropriate ESG data? And maybe there isn't. But that becomes one of the key attributes of your data product. The same as discoverability, the same as the other DATSIS principles as defined by Zhamak Dehghani. ESG should be one of those. So before a data product goes into production, there are questions asked, well, have you looked at possible data points regarding ESG in your data product, yes or no? So then we can see we've got maybe aggregator data products that are collecting the ESG-relevant data for the different domains. And then you may have a regional ESG that's connecting to the data products for purchasing, marketing, sales, and finance. And you can see the way the ESG data is being captured locally, and it gets bubbled up and aggregated for a region. But then you may have different other regions in your organization, with different country boundaries, where extending the mesh to them may be difficult. So internally, you might have something like a marketplace, a data marketplace, where that becomes the actual collection point for the ESG data across your different regions. But that's all within your own organization. And that your client ESG marketplace is centralized, but it's centralized in your own organization. But it becomes difficult, right? Because for your scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, getting your partners to connect to your centralized marketplace will be an issue, okay? And then that led me to the question, should marketplaces, ESG, just data marketplaces, should they be centralized or should they be decentralized? So it's interesting to think about, there's some interesting product developments. So there's a company called the Ocean Protocol. They're looking at blockchain. They're looking at NFTs, data NFTs, and data tokens as a way of showing proof and storing data sets. Now, the actual data isn't stored in the blockchain, but the actual authentication and the proof that that data set belongs to a certain person is there, right? So I think this will be an expanding market because centralized marketplaces are centralized, and we're looking to move away from centralization to being decentralized. So in terms of next steps, and before I even go to next steps, working with Starburst is an absolute pleasure. You know, they're a great organization to work with. I mean, they've got innovation in their blood. They always treat me like a king when I come and try and work with them, you know. So I want to say that up front. Thank you so much, Starburst. If you want to connect with me, this is my LinkedIn profile, so please do reach out to me. And together with Starburst, we will kind of help you on your ESG, what your ESG strategy is, and how data mesh and data products will really help.